Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Awesome vs. Trevor here. I'm joined by Thomas, as always, and today we are talking about the new Richard Linklater project, Hitman. Came out at, I think, TIFF last year, and then was at Sundance this year, and it is finally out almost a year later after its festival debut. But heard really incredible things about this from festivals. Linklater, for both of us, I think is a top 5 all-time filmmaker.
I'd say
Both
top one, but that's just
yeah,
me.
I mean, I adore Linklater. I have the Before trilogy behind me. I think the greatest trilogy ever made, some of the greatest films ever made. So obviously not going into this expecting the Before trilogy or, Boyhood or Days and Confused
Days
or
of
any of his
Confused,
other,
yeah.
incredible films. But it was pretty high up on my anticipated list just purely because of the name of Richard Linklater. And the film, it's a professor of philosophy, because of course he's a professor of philosophy. It's a Richard Linklater movie. Come on. But he ends up becoming a undercover cop who is pretending to be a hitman, and then busting people for wanting to hire a hitman. And then he meets a woman, and then it gets complicated. You know how I'm not gonna pretend to be misogynistic. I'm not even gonna try to.
No,
Okay.
I wouldn't.
Yep. Anyways, yeah. We haven't actually talked about this movie at all, really. I'm curious about your opening thoughts.
So my opening thoughts is that you've heard probably a lot of conversation around this movie if you're on this side of the film space, whatever, and you may have heard that it's just like a fun romp sort of thing. It's not anywhere, as you say, it's not anywhere near his sort of magnum opus works like that, but it is still a fun film, and I would tend to agree with that for the most part. I think it does bear its themes on the surface a little too heavily at times when they're having direct conversations about some of the ideas that you're like, are being explored. You don't need to have them so explicitly. I wasn't a fan of all of the framing devices. However, at the end of the day, I did buy into the romance between Glen Powell and what's the lead actress's name? Remind me.
It is. I am also pulling it up right now. Audrey Arionia.
Audrey Arionia. Yes, exactly. I did buy into their romance, which I think is fundamental to this film, because at the end of the day, it is a romance film. Like it's a comedy. But it's also a romance. And if you don't buy into that, I don't think it works. But you do, because they're both charming. They both have great chemistry. All the scenes with them are just dynamic. And so the whole film rides off the back of that. And therefore, it works for the most part. I liked the general concept. I liked what it was going for in terms of tonal wise. However, as I said, there are slight flaws with how it is all.
Yeah, and it's a very concept-driven film, but not in like a very heady way, I guess.
No.
It kind of establishes very early on, I think almost in the first scene, what exactly the concept is, and it just kind of rides with the concept, and it doesn't really go places that are unexpected, I think, for the most part.
No.
It mainly stays within the lines, and it still does explore some very interesting stuff within those lines, but it never quite leaves the lines. And there's some excellent sequences. The notes app sequence is how I'm going to refer to it for non-spoilers in particular.
Sure.
Incredible. And there's some really which I don't feel like we see that much, but just like really great like tension building direction from Linklater, which is interesting to see, just because again we haven't seen that much from him
he's
before.
really, as I say, he's leaning into his comedy sensibilities as well. There's a montage which happens fairly early on in the film, so it's not really spoilers, but where he is becoming this hitman, and he's playing this character. And there's so many just fun little, maybe 20-30 second sequences that are just so brilliantly conceived and just really work. And Glen Powell is really showing off its sort of ranges, being able to be this clearly fake persona the whole time with these characters, but like still managed to sell it somewhat, So I think Glen Powell is a real standout from this film. I really think if there's anything to take away from this film, it's this.
It's a star-making role. It is
exactly. He's not just leading Hollywood man, anyone but you, twisted. He's not just that. He can actually go a bit beyond that, and so I'd be excited to see him do these smaller projects for the most part. I'm sure he is obviously fairly a big name now, but so we might not see a film like Hitman with him in again. But I think that'll be a shame. I think that is a loss to this kind of smaller scale filmmaking if we lose talent.
For sure. So kind of going into, you mentioned how the themes are very much kind of bared on the surface, which I think is unfortunately kind of true. like the fact him being a philosophy professor
Yeah.
and then him having the conversation with, I think it's his ex-wife at the beginning of it.
That was the
Like,
one scene I was like, this doesn't need to be here. This is
yeah,
completely superfluous, and he's just
it
explicitly stating what we're seeing.
it feels like there's like I know every film has this kind of like its privileged moment, if you will, like where it states explicitly this is what the movie is. This is what you were supposed to take from this film, and it felt like Hitman almost had like 2 or 3 of those, where it wanted to make really sure that you understood that this was about the abstraction of identity. And I do think that when it does get a bit beneath the surface and it does start to actually explore the abstraction of identity, I think that those are some of its stronger moments. Like there's like a kitchen conversation towards the end of the film between Glen Powell and Audrey Aranya, which I think is actually quite good, and it relates back to a lot of what was set up, but it just, I feel like, is hindered by the fact that it sets up the bridges for you to get there and doesn't really let you get there on their own, which I just think makes the film as a whole a bit less rewarding than it could have been as an audience member.
Yeah, because I think the best moments where the themes really come to light, where these ideas about personality and changing your persona to fit a certain brief, I think those are best explored when we see him interacting with other people in different personas.
Right.
Like we're
And when
seeing
we're
it
actually seeing
visually.
something happen, not
Exactly.
having
We're
it
seeing it
described.
visually, and a lot of the
Yeah.
film is that with him trying to create this connection with this person. But and I think that is where it works. But it's all of these sort of extra conversations that feel like there feels like a lot of fat on this film, and it's not a
Yeah.
long film by any means. It's not it's a breezy watch. It goes by
Yeah.
quickly. But if you reflect on it more, you think there are a good 4 or 5 scenes that I think could
It
be
feels
cut
dumbed
very
down
easily.
weirdly.
It
Like
does. It feels dumbed down to for sort of a studio level. Linklater's hands are very much on the wheel of this, I think, but it's like there's someone in the back giving directions. You know, it's that kind of.
Yeah, and it did. I think also visually suffer from made for Netflix syndrome, where like Linklater does have a very nice way of having his films look really kind of magical and have their own feel to them, even if it is just ordinary life. And this just felt very Netflix visually. It was very gray. It was very bland. Like it isn't doing much really, which I just thought was quite unfortunate considering what we've seen him do with just some more kind of standard basic kind of visual subject matter. So yeah, I think both visually and kind of as far as the thematic exploration goes, it did just feel a bit dumbed down for Netflix.
For sure. But having said that, I do still think that the fact that those ideas are explored in the first place is a massive positive for what is on the surface a fairly simple studio sort of comedy. Like
Yeah.
it's a sort of concept, it's a high concept sort of thing that sold to any other director. I don't think they would have touched on these ideas of
Right.
changing personality and persona and that kind of thing. So the fact that a film even goes there, and it is too explicit in points as we mentioned, but it's existent and it's very much a part of the film.
Like as a studio comedy, it's excellent. As a Richard Linklater film, it's a bit disappointing.
Yes, exactly. And it does fall into some of his tropes. I'm not a massive fan of like the voiceover in particular. I just don't think really works. I think he's writing the voiceover completely with disregard to the character themselves. Like I can't imagine the character saying the things that he's saying in voiceover, and therefore it just sort of falls apart for me. I'm like, and it takes me out of the film. It feels like Linklater's. It feels very authoritative. It feels like Linklater is therefore he's stating what he wants you to take away from it, which is
again, it's those
fine.
privileged moments where it feels like the film has a bit too many. Which again is just it's unfortunate because it does take away from, I think, some of the really strong explorations that are happening. So yeah, I don't know. I also think it's quite interesting, and I touched on this a bit on Letterboxd, but in comparison to his other films, it really does feel like the inverse to them in a lot of ways. Like if you think about stuff like, the Before trilogy or like Dazed and Confused, and like it's very like ordinary life and ordinary people, that's sort of unremarkable but painted in like this very remarkable light where everything about it just feels so magical, even though what's happening isn't that special. I suppose in like with this film, everything that's happening, like as far as the presentation, is very remarkable. Like it feels like a studio comedy. It feels like a crime film. It feels like, like it has the tension of an action film at point. When in reality, it is just a very simple love story that doesn't have that much depth. And again, look at something like for a trilogy. It's a love story with so much depth and intricacies, but the pageantry, the presentation is very plain. And it is set against this backdrop where nothing is happening aside from just the conversation. So as far as like how he portrays romance in this, it really does feel like the complete inverse of his typical approach. Which it's weird because it still feels Linklater, but it also does feel very detached from, I think, a lot of his work.
Sure, no, I can definitely understand. I mean, maybe I think Where'd You Go, Bernadette? It's much better than that film, but there is still that sort of
It
studio
feels more
influence
akin to
on
that.
one.
Yes.
It feels more
Yeah.
akin to that one. I think Linklater is just a man who understands love and understands dynamics and understands how people function, though, and where they function best. Like how to get the most out of a person is really the same as how to get the most out of a character in terms of looking at, that sort of thing. And I think Linklater understands that. He understands dynamics. He understands what make people tick. And I think he puts them in environments that breed that sort of thing. I think it's everything around the film, everything around the romance that doesn't quite match that level. Like there's even stuff in terms of the crime aspect of it that I think are massively shoehorned in and are not relevant.
It feels too clever for its own good at points.
Yes, and like there are elements like this is not really spoiled, but the life insurance policy which comes up towards the last part of the film, that is really just thrown in, and I feel like there is a way to get these characters to that point without needing these extra factors. Like I think the relationship to drive the film.
It's like a distraction almost from the core ideas of the film. And again, I feel like Linklater films are typically much more focused, I guess, on their central thesis, which I think with this, it is about love and romance and changing to be, a person for somebody else and all these types of things. And again, there's so much about the pageantry and presentation around it. And it weirdly feels like performative in a way to get there, which, obviously not what he was intending, but is interesting on a meta level, considering that the entire film is about presentation and pageantry within oneself. And then that one of the film's bigger problems is the fact that it feels like it's trying to be something else and kind of loses sight of what the film really is at its core.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. But I do think there is something to be said about the fact that he is operating in this like quick cut Marvel, post Marvel society. Because I think he does really work. Like the film really moves at a rapid pace. And I think the editing is
for the genre, it's good. Yeah,
exactly. Like all the montage stuff where he's playing these different roles, I think is just so funny and it's so well constructed and put together. I love the Tilda Swinton-esque one.
Yes, it's excellent.
Because
yeah,
I love how he says that he tailors his personas for the person. Like what about that person?
That person was like Tilda Swinton. Yeah.
I don't know, but it's just so there's so much background to the world that he's able to like instill into the film in such a concise manner. Like we understand the relationships between people instantly. Like we understand who, I think his name's Jasper, the former hitman. Yeah, like we understand everything we would ever need to know about the character.
Like exactly, the people in the band, you understand exactly what their role are.
100%, 100%. And I think that is very impressive to do. And I think it's where I think Linklater really does work in his slower stuff. Before Midnight, it's not exactly quick. Dazed and Confused moves at quite a slow pace, but also he really works in these high sort of energy situations.
Is just Linklater is just a very talented man.
I think versatile is the word I'd use, really. Versatile.
But I suppose this, and you kind of mentioned this before, this almost feels more like Linklater kind of chucked into the confines of a studio comedy rather than a studio comedy molded around Linklater.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Whereas I think the problem is when those two things try and converge and when Linklater really tries to imprint himself onto it, I think those elements that don't really work because they don't mesh. Like Linklater, he has done studio films before, obviously. But him and this sort of studio comedy, I don't think fundamentally are the right match.
They're two separate films that work.
Separate films.
They're two separate films that work like 70% of the time, but there is that 30% of the time where it does feel like there's a disconnect between like the ideas and then what we're actually seeing on screen.
Yeah, and the two things come together nicely. I think Linklater is
Mhm.
able to create a nice studio comedy, but I don't think he would ever be able to create a great one, is the impression I got
Yeah.
from this. Like, it's just not in his wheelhouse to create something great. But whereas he can make something very good because he's very competent, he's very talented, obviously.
Like, it's very
Um,
watchable, it's very
yeah,
enjoyable, you could show this to anybody and they'd probably have a good time with it,
yeah.
but it
And
didn't
again,
really
I
give
think
him the
that just
space.
comes down to him understanding people and how they work. Like,
Right.
he understands audiences and he understands what makes them
I mean,
tick
like,
as well.
as we see in the film, that's Glen Powell's whole thing is that he understands his audience and tailors it to them, and
Yeah,
it feels like Linklater's almost doing that for us as the audience and for, like, a Netflix audience, and he's creating a Richard Linklater film for a Netflix audience,
yeah,
and I think that that's perfectly fine, and obviously people are eating this up, right?
yeah.
People are loving this, on Netflix, they loved it at festivals, all this type of thing, and yes, like, it wasn't made exclusively for Netflix, it was bought by Netflix, but it is appealing to that type of audience, I guess,
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to get across. Like, it is appealing to a broader audience. Linklater's trying to reach this broader audience. And again, it does feel like there is that slight disconnect.
Yeah, no, for sure. But for the most part, I still think the film really works. And because, as I say, it's all about the central romance. And Linklater is just a man who understands how that should play. And he puts it in here. And I think the film comes together quite nicely as an overall thing. But it is a bit surface level at times. It doesn't quite reach the heights that I think it's fundamentally because we know Linklater is capable of more.
Yeah. And it
And
feels
we
like
know he's doing
it feels like you can see him being restrained and restricted within the film.
Yeah, yeah.
Just by the subject matter and the kind of theming. Like, it doesn't necessarily feel like it was the correct project for him, but rather a project that was elevated by him.
Yes, no, I 100% agree with that because in the hands of any other director, I don't think it works nearly as well. I don't think,
Yeah.
and as well, I would also extend that to Glen Powell. If Glen Powell
Yeah,
wasn't
Glen
in the
Powell is
lead role,
perfect for this role.
I think it's a nice match, and I hope to see them work together again at some point. I think that would be quite
Mhm.
fun if we get a Glen Powell, Richard Linklater reunion in say 5, 10 years. I think
Yeah.
that would be really fun because it is him as well. Like I think without him being just so charismatic as a performer
Mhm.
and so
Well, and he co-wrote
commanding
the
of
film as
everyone.
well. Like,
Yeah, exactly. You can tell his imprint is on the film as well, and you feel like this is the character he was really born to play for the most part. Like
yes,
with
absolutely.
anyone else in the acting, with anyone else in the directing, I don't think it comes together nearly as nicely as it does. With them, I think it comes together as a pretty good overall project.
Yes, for sure, for sure. So, yeah, no, it is very enjoyable even if surface level. Like, it's hard to not have a good time with the film.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, it did leave me wanting a bit more, especially as I've sat on it a bit and thought on
Yeah.
it a bit more. So, if you're ready for a ranking or ratings, I'm feeling a very strong 7.
That is exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, I
Cool.
think strong 7 is a nice place for this one, which is
Bordering on an 8, but yeah,
yeah.
I think very
Oh yeah,
strong
closer
7.
to 8 than 6, much closer to 8, but I think 7
Yeah.
is about right.
Yep, for sure. So, yes, but definitely watch it. Like, again, this would be something where I would have a very hard time imagining somebody disliking the film.
No, it's such an easy film to recommend. I've actually already recommended it to about 3 or 4 people because
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think they'd like it. I think they'd like it. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It succeeds in being broadly accessible and just doing a bit more, I guess, thematically to elevate it above any other film of the like.
yeah,
Even if it didn't necessarily reach the peaks that it probably could have and should have, if not for kind of the audience it was tailored for.
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, no, good movie though. Very, very excited to see where Linklater goes after this because
100%.
like he's coming
I
after
mean,
this and then Paul 10 and a half, like
we know he's got that 30-year project with Paul
the
Mescal,
30-year
but
project with Paul Mescal, like yeah.
yeah, we know he's got to do a before trilogy reunion when they're like 80. That's got to happen at
Yep,
some point.
it's
But
got
in
to.
the intermediary period, he could do
Yes.
anything. He's so versatile. He's so multifaceted.
Right.
Whereby
Where
I'm
even in
yeah.
his weaker projects, like they're still good. Like I don't know if there's like I mean, there's Bernadette, but
But
there
even
isn't
that,
that
I
many.
don't think it's not egregiously bad. It's just good.
Right. He's a very consistently solid filmmaker.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, definitely excited for whatever's next. But that is all for this review. Thank you everybody for watching. You can follow us on Letterboxd and Twitter in the link in the description. We'll have reviews for Inside Out 2 coming up. I Saw the TV Glow is finally coming out on digital. Thank fucking God. Can finally watch that movie after waiting for 2 years. We got the Watchers. We got our Lemonade Mouth retrospective. Lots of fun stuff. So until next time, thank you for watching. Stay safe.